Cat Days by Griffin Rose on AO3. Episode 40, Chapter 10, The Rest of Summer. There wasn't enough coffee in the world, Shouta decided. Definitely not enough decent coffee, and most certainly not in a police station. Maybe he should complain. Didn't they have enough funding for decent coffee? He swirled his cup in distaste, finally throwing it out on his way to the door. He barely slept in 3 days since Kimino, too busy with checking on students and getting debriefed on the raids. And then, on top of everything else, coordinating a new dorm system for UA with other teachers. Nezu did the bulk of the work in getting them approved, but it wasn't as simple as sticking a few more buildings on campus. They had to figure out meals and what the students would be responsible for and what UA would provide, figuring out teacher parole schedules, and having the teachers then work out the conflicting schedules with their agencies. Then they had to alter the summer camp plans to fit in the UA gyms, and now that the dorms had been announced, had to go to each and every student's home and hear from their parents how badly UA had messed up, and how he was going to have to do that with all might, which was not exactly his idea of a good time. Plus, he was trying to take care of Izuku too, until Izuku could morph back. The kid was mostly self-sufficient, and Hitoshi had been stepping up, while Shouta and Hisashi were busy. Shouta didn't know how to thank him properly, but he was going to find a way. Somehow, with all the free time he had. But it was still on Shouta to get Izuku to the healing appointments, and to make sure he was taking the right medications at the right times. And when Izuku unsurprisingly had nightmares, he wanted Shouta. Shouta had always said goodbye to his bed and mainly slept in his fort still set up in the living room. This is why he needed decent caffeine. Was it too much to ask for real coffee? He was in a bitter mood when he arrived to UA for another strategy meeting, but at least there was decent coffee in the break room. If anyone had a problem with him being a few minutes late, they'd wisely keep it to themselves. The meeting was short, at least. Everyone was stressed, being pulled in every direction, so they stayed on task and got in the record time. Shouta took the chance to go home. Even better, when he was there, Koda and Tsuyu were there, keeping Izuku company. He had a parade of friends coming and going for days, though Todoroki was suspiciously not one of them. The kid was clearly smart enough not to walk into his teacher's home after the stunt he pulled, and Shouta was grateful for the chance to calm down from his internal feelings of the matter and think logically about it. It was one of the many things circling the back of his mind that he was pushing off to figure out later. With a quick hello, and his kids taken care of, Shouta allowed himself the luxury of laying down in his bed. He fell asleep in minutes. The dorms were up and running just a few days later, despite the odd, every family was on board with them. Some had been more hesitant than others, and it had been his students more than Shouta who had convinced them otherwise. He appreciated their faith in him and the school more than he could tell them. Move-in day came, which was another hassle. Izuku wouldn't move in until he could morph again, since Shouta didn't trust any of the students to keep a rubber eye on him. In a fight, yeah, he had a grudging respect for their combat. Basic life skills and common sense, none of them had. Seriously. Todoroki finally stopped by to visit Izuku, and Hitoshi asked him what happened in Kimino. Todoroki's response? I wasn't there. As if he could deny his involvement when his eyes had been all over the scene. He did have a good poker face, though. Shouta would give him that. If it wasn't so blaringly obvious he had been there, Shouta might have believed him. But he decided to deal with that later, with all the others when they officially moved in, gathering them all in the front steps of the dorm. Welcome to the new dorms, he greeted. Before you settle in, there is something we need to go over first. Todoroki, Bakugo, Yaoyorozu. All three of them tensed up. I don't know what the hell you were thinking, doing in Kimino Ward. I'm disappointed in all three of you. You're extremely lucky none of you were hurt or killed. I was there too. Kirishima stepped forward. The rescue was my idea. Ah, there was the missing piece. While Shouta could identify the others based on the quirks he's seen used, he hadn't been able to figure out who teamed these up together. Kirishima's involvement made sense. Did anyone else know about this? Shouta asked. Most of the class couldn't meet his eyes. He sighed. Figures. Shame he couldn't just expel all of them. The world was watching the school too closely for Nezu to allow that. Though, they didn't need people getting pissed at him for his harsh judgments. Then you're all going to have to work to earn my trust again. Step one toe out of line, and you're gone. He went on to explain the few dorm rules they had before unleashing them on the place. They were a little too excited to get in there. He hoped the building survived. A full week and a half after Izuku first came home, he was finally able to morph back. Well, he wasn't medically advised to try yet. They wanted to give it a few more days, but Izuku was tired of being a cat. Look, he had issues being a cat for any length of time. Sue him. The vet, with the healing quirk, finished their current session, and Izuku went through his current range of motions with her. You're coming along nicely, Dr. Singh said. Your broken ribs are more than fractures now, and that concussion is pretty much gone. He meowed hopefully. She laughed and shook her head. Sorry, but it's better safe than sorry. One of your ribs is still pretty close to your lungs. It's a miracle you didn't puncture them that night. Right. He morphed half a dozen times with broken ribs. The rebellious part of his mind pointed out he hadn't done any extra damage to himself. You'll be back to normal soon enough, Shouta said, rubbing the top of his head. Yeah, but Izuku wanted to be human now. He was going to have enough feline habits as it was after this. He didn't want to give his body time to build up any more. And he missed talking and texting his friends. His phone has been rejected, and it's hardly mattered since he couldn't use it as a cheetah. He missed opposable thumbs. So much. Dr. Singe wrote something down and said something about lowering the dosage of pain meds, but Izuku was impulsively reaching for his quirk before he could stop himself. It had been hard to reach all week, some instinctive part of him refusing to put his body through that. The block was still there, but it was easier to push around now. It helped that he specifically trained to overcome the wall as a kid. The next thing he knew, his chest screamed in agony, and his fingers clawed at his shirt. Ha! Fingers. Izuku! Oh my! Idiot! She told you to wait! Shouta fussed over him, pushing his hair out of his eyes. Izuku grinned at him. Hi, Dad. Shouta exhaled and looked up at the ceiling, shaking his head. That was reckless. Carefully, and with Shota's help, he sat up on the table. Worth it, Izuku declared. Dr. Singe pulled out her telescope again. I think I'll be the judge of that. She checked him over, poking and prodding all his ribs and broken bones again, while Shouta texted Recovery Girl. Once Dr. Singe proved he hadn't made anything worse, Shouta whisked Izuku off to school, nursing her healing kiss. The kiss knocked Izuku out, and he woke up in Hitoshi's bulk in the middle of the night when Shouta came home from patrol. Hitoshi was off in the dorms, and now that Izuku was headed up, he'd move in too. It was a shame, really. He'd barely gotten the chance to share a room together, and it was already over. It was a good thing they hadn't moved to a bigger house, after all. Izuku sat up and stretched, relenting in the freedom of movement. He almost felt like doing yoga, just because he could. But first, dinner. He went out to the kitchen, finding a covered plate in the fridge for him to reheat. He was conscious of using chopsticks to eat, even though his instincts screamed to shove his face in the plate. It was going to be a rough few days adjusting to human limbs again. Shouta joined him after changing into some sweats, ruffling his hair and getting a glass of water. So, what questions do you have first? Shouta asked. Izuku launched into a mental list he had been keeping. He wanted to know what the dorms were like, what he'd missed in class, details about the raid, and everything else Shouta could tell him about Kimino. Shouta entertained all his questions, even when the time dragged out to a point where he'd missed a chance to get any sleep before class. I'm sorry, Izuku said when he realized. You didn't get a chance to sleep. Don't be. I've missed your voice. He ruffled Izuku's hair again and then set him off to get ready. Now that he was healed, Izuku was fully expected to participate in class. A lot of his stuff was already in the dorms. Hisashi and Atoshi, under Izuku's supervision, had packed for him. There were only a few essentials he needed to pack, and then he changed into his gym uniform and went with Shouta to surprise everyone. He did have a new phone, and he could have warned everyone, but that wasn't nearly as fun as seeing the looks on everyone's faces when he walked in with his dad. Midoriya, you're back! Good to see you, bro. They swarmed him, hugging and clapping him on the back. Shouta allowed it for a few minutes before ordering them to get started. Izuku rolled over to a large open space in the gym. He'd been planning this ultimate move for a while, ever since his internships with Ryuko. Are you sure you're up for training? Todoroki called over. Yeah, Izuku nodded. Recovery Girl gave me the all clear yesterday. Plus, he knew Shouta would be keeping an eye on him. The second he thought Izuku was overdoing it, Izuku would find himself benched for the rest of the day. Judging by the way Todoroki frowned, Izuku figured Shouta wouldn't be the only one. He kneeled on the floor, palms flat on the ground in front of him while he closed his eyes to meditate. Large animals had always been tricky for him. Something about creating mass where there wasn't any to begin with? He had a feeling that was part of why morphing as a kid had always been difficult too, aside from the animal instincts getting in the way. With Shouta helping him, he trained a few specific animals until they were reliable. Now that he had real combat against villains, he was finding he preferred smaller animals most of the time anyways. With smaller streets and enclosed spaces, he wouldn't be able to rely on an elephant or a rhino. But against something like a villain from Kimino, who'd leveled the city blocks, that'd give him plenty of room for something larger. He pictured what he wanted as clear as he could, down to every limb and tooth. Holding that image tightly, he let the morph wash over him. Combined fingers to length to talons, for scales to grow over his skin, and most importantly, to grow. When he next opened his eyes, he stood about the height of an elephant, and Todoroki's jaw had dropped. Izuku shook out his wings, noting that they weren't quite long enough to truly carry his weight. He'd have to work on that. Holy shit, Midoriya! Kaminari yelled. Whoops, he hadn't meant to distract the class. Showed aside and walked over to Izuku. Everyone, back to work. Izuku stretched out his neck. It didn't have the range of motion he expected. Maybe he needed a longer one. Something to consider for next time. It was long enough to at least let him look over his handiwork. For his first time morphing into a dragon, it wasn't bad. Really, kid? Shouta asked. Izuku grinned, lips pulling back over long fangs. He morphed back, drifting down to the size of a human. Shouta shook his side. First day back, and what do you morph into first? A dragon, of all things. Needs work, Izuku said. I doubt these wings could have carried me anywhere. With mythical creatures, proportions were up to Izuku. His transformations were always better if he could see the animal in person, because then he had realistic images to fall back on. Even dinosaurs were doable with fossil muscles and stuffed reincarnations. The only real dragon Izuku had referenced now was Kyoki, and she was only partially dragonic. It was up to Izuku to figure out the right proportions in his head as he went, using trial and error to find out what worked and what didn't. You couldn't have just started with, like, a parakeet or something? Shouta asked. Izuku frowned. No, but I did forget to mention my bones hollow. That might be important for a fight. Shouta dragged a hand down his face. Please, place yourself today. If you end up in Recovery Girl's office again tonight, I'm not saving you from her lecture. That was almost enough to scare Izuku off from forming training and for the rest of the day. But he was already far behind the others. He couldn't afford any more missing training. Not when they were going to do the professional license in a week. That was barely any time to train at all. I'll be fine, I promise, Izuku said, licking the back of his hand as he rubbed an itch off his face. Only when he lowered his hand did he realize what he had done. Damn it. He'd been so good ignoring those instincts, too. Shouta snorted and ruffled his hair. Let that be your reminder not to overdo it. Yeah. Izuku waved his dad off. Side effects or not, he still had to do this. He just hoped none of his classmates had laser pointers. Okay. Oh, that was something that I didn't think about. Mythical creatures. Could he transform into mythical creatures and possibly even do mythical creatures? That is a thought that I was not thinking about, but now I'm thinking about the implications of that. Could Izuku do mythical creatures? Obviously he can, we've seen this. And if so, what is the extent? Can he do a siren? Can he do, obviously the water siren and then the air siren, the typical siren. How do I explain this? The media siren, the classic siren that people think of, and then the actual siren, because sirens were actually bird women. Yep. Bird women. And I don't mean like they had cute, it's like, imagine a big bird with like the head of a woman. From my understanding, that's what a siren was. Or some constructity of that, right? What about a manatee? The horse people? What about, I'm trying to think. Narwhals actually exist, never mind. A fairy. And she was a fairy. If he could do dragons, then can he do fairies? And if he could do fairies, can he do elves? But would fairies and elves count, considering the fact that they're humanoid? So if it's humanoid, can Izuku no longer do it? And if so, can Izuku give himself some animal characteristics while not... I sound like Izuku. I sound like Izuku. Oh god. Okay, as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.